Welcome to Tune In and Find the Others. We are with Caleb McCoy. Hi, Caleb.
Hey Tony, that was a beautiful jingle.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I think it just needs like some auto tune over the vocals, a little synth in the background. It'd be
Oh,
top
man.
notch.
Yeah, that'll be the outro. It'll come back around and it'll be the auto-tune version, but it'll also have like dubstep in the background.
Yeah, like a beat underneath it. I can dig that. Nice.
Yeah.
We'll have our finest people working on it while we record.
How are you, man?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Very good. It's been a while since I've seen you in person.
Couple months now. I saw you off on your voyage to the islands.
Yes, to the Caribbean. Why is the rum gone?
Yeah, exactly. So now you're eating bananas and pouring concrete and feeding chickens.
Yes, exactly. That's
all typical
description of what I'm doing.
Stuff.
Yeah, living off grid. It's been really nice. But what about you, dude? Like, you just birthed a new. Well, you didn't birth, but
I didn't do it necessarily.
You helped.
I was present.
You have a new child.
Yes. And I've been spending a lot more time with her. I left my old job at the end of July. So for the past week and a half, I've had a lot more time to spend with her. And it's just like something that I'm not finding I'm very good at putting into words, like the je ne sais quoi of hanging out with a baby. But there's something about, like just being with this new life, this new being who's like full of curiosity and just is experiencing everything on like a really raw level, you know what I mean? Like just raw hunger, raw joy. So yeah, it's probably one of the most psychedelic experiences of my life, and it's just caring for a human being that has half my DNA.
Mm-hmm. Why do you say psychedelic?
Because it's expanding or expansive, or like that's what psychedelic means, mind expanding, right? In the same way, like a proper psychedelic trip like breaks down your sense of self. You know what I mean? Like I feel like my old self is being broken down, because it's like one thing to have your own like selfish inclinations and desires and dreams of like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. And you'll find that like having a baby, like today, there were numerous instances where I was like, oh, I'm going to bake some bread. And I'm halfway through making the dough, and then I hear her peep from the other room, and it's like, well, this has to be paused or like put on hold for a while, And I'm choosing to see her as a Buddha, which is, I mean, she kind of looks like the Chinese little like figurines of a Buddha, because she's got a big belly and is like basically bald, right? But I mean from like the perspective of like, what is this? If this being is infinitely wise and infinitely compassionate, what is it trying to teach me, in this moment? Right now, she's teaching me a lot about patience and perseverance, especially through sleeplessness. So, it's yeah, in that way it's psychedelic. It's something that changes you from the inside out and the outside in.
Yeah, I love that you broke down the
should own that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that I've probably heard before, but just like having it be like the words broken down again, it just like really like makes a lot of sense. And I've always loved how Jason Silva talks about taking a trip.
Yes.
Having the same, like, is very similar to like taking a trip to another place. Like taking a trip as in a psychedelic trip, you're also like it's very you're using the same language when you're taking a trip, and it has kind of the same or a similar kind of like rewarding experience where you're just
Right.
thrusted outside of your comfort zone, or you're
Hmm.
thrusted outside of like your normal everyday life, and you just like go on this journey and you just like
Hmm.
adapt to whatever comes
Right.
through.
And whether it's like within or without, right? Whether it's like more of an interior journey or an exterior one, because I've had plenty of trips, right, where like walking in the woods or like taking a stroll through the park or going for a bike ride, but also plenty of ones where it's all, internal as well. There's that
Yeah.
like same archetype of the hero's journey it seems to follow, where like you're, like you say, you're cast out of your original environment, go on like a series of tests and challenges, beat the final boss, and then come home with like a boon, like come home with like some treasure or artifact to share with the tribe or the village or what have you, And Terrence McKenna said like the most psychedelic thing you could do besides taking a trip or trying to explore your sexuality was going on like a physical trip,
Mm,
because like encountering other languages, foods, cultures, ways of being in the world breaks down your normal modes of being in the world yourself, which you have
yeah.
unthinkingly just taken from the culture that reared you.
Right. Yeah. I think it's important. I think it's really important that everybody does, like, I'm not trying to tell other people what to do, but just trying to say that like I already saw the benefits after a week of me leaving on my journey, and I'm coming back
Mm-hmm.
now, which is beautiful. But the first week of um, just encountering, I wasn't supposed to stay in Puerto Rico. I was supposed to fly straight through,
Mm-hmm.
and my flight ended up getting delayed, or I had to switch my flight because there was a problem with the amount of time between me arriving and me going on the other plane that was a
Right.
smaller plane, a smaller airline
Right.
to Dominica because they don't have a very big airport. Um, so going to that, going to Puerto Rico, and then having the situation where I had to have a COVID test for the next flight, and being told by certain people that I could get it done at the airport, and then that wasn't true, and then going back and forth and trying to figure things out, and then I couldn't fly on Monday, so I had to wait till Thursday. Just created, it gave me everything that I needed to, because I was able to experience San Juan. Like I was able to
Mm-hmm.
just like be in the capital city of a island I've never been to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's still part of the US, which is like, it's such a weird thing. It's like,
Right. It's like the stepchild state. It's like part of the family, but we don't actually acknowledge it.
yes.
I mean, ask anybody, any Puerto Rican person, and statehood is a very contentious issue. But
Yeah.
yeah, it in a way it is more of the United States. You know what I mean, or a colony of our American empire.
Yeah.
But it's cool that like without things going not the way you expected it to, you were thrust into that situation and actually came out better for it, right? And richer in experience.
Yeah, that's the point. That's the point I was trying to make, is like going to just like immediately when I arrived in Puerto Rico, just like totally like in a new like everyone is different, like everyone is like, I'm just thrusted into this community where um majority of the people speak Spanish, and even though it's a really healthy mix of like all different types of cultures, and like
Mm-hmm.
and people are speaking English too, um but like it was just wild to me that I was like, here I am, like how can I adjust, how can I adapt, how can I use like what I know to apply to this situation.
Totally.
And be at the edge of my comfort zone in every single moment, and that was kind of the point.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's true that it relates so well to like taking a trip, like anything that you can do to like put yourself to the edge of what you know about yourself or what you know
Mm-hmm.
about the world to expand what is possible.
Or like you
And
said, the
it's,
edge of your comfort zone. I really like pushing that. I found
yeah.
really rewarding when I traveled myself. Like when I was traveling through Spain and mostly traveling by getting rides with total strangers. Not hitchhiking per se, but using like an online platform to find people like that. Um, you got to pass the time somehow, right? And my Spanish what isn't amazing, right? But I would push myself to ask them as many questions as possible. You know what I mean? And I don't know. There's like something about continually leaning into that, like little bit more of discomfort that actually brings a lot of
Mm-hmm.
reward. I find,
Yeah, absolutely. So you are a stargazer, correct?
Yes, I quite enjoy doing that. Um, Yeah, in fact, the skies are speaking right now. There's thunderstorms blowing through our area, so there won't be really any stars to see tonight. But yeah, I like spending a lot of the time looking at the night sky and thinking about or studying how it like how it relates to what happens here. I guess for lack of a better term.
Yeah. Yeah, so you do these like astro weather forecasts that I pick up mostly on Facebook, but you also do it on Instagram, and that'll be in the description below. But what what is it, and what inspired you to do it?
Okay, good question. So the astro weather forecast started maybe 3 months ago now, maybe four. I think it was back in April or May. And it's kind of a daily meditation slash creative practice of mine. So I've been studying astrology kind of as a hobby horse for the past 3 or 4 years, right? And we could broadly speaking define astrology as the study of the relationship between celestial events and earthly events, right? Not implying that there's even necessarily a causal relationship, like the stars cause this to happen, right? But there seems to be some kind of relationship here, like a correlation, right? So I was honestly like a skeptic for a long time, which in hindsight is a little um, surprising or ridiculous, right? Because I've, for the past 6, 7, 8 years or whatever, like dove headfirst into everything esoteric, right? And astrology undergirds a lot of the like Western magical tradition, right? But because of like certain ways that astrology's come down to us currently in its sort of like new agey pseudo psychological form, I always wrote it off. I was like leaned slightly scientific and thought like, well, there's no causal mechanism. I don't see how anyway with physics that this could work, et cetera, et cetera. And kind of dismissed it outright until I gave it enough of a chance to like look at my own chart, look at my own transits, and it was like really a key book that changed my mind called Cosmos and Psyche. So there's that word again, psyche, right? The soul or the mind in Greek. And in the book, the author Richard Tarnas goes through history and attempts to basically map a lot of Western history and key events in Western history, key figures in Western history to certain like outer planet transits, you would say, or like events that happen in the stars. So, so I read that book at the end of 2019, right? And he describes a lot of outer planet transits. Long story short, there were a bunch of outer planet transits that happened in January, 2020 that sort of spelled doom and gloom. Like they were very like negative, I guess, events you could say. And then all of 2020 happened, right? And that like really hit home or like confirmed for me the reality of astrology that like even if there isn't a causal relationship that the stars necessarily create or make happen events on Earth, it's more like a celestial clockwork, like a big clock where when this hand points here and this hand points here, it means the quality of time is going to be like this. Like astrology holds the, I think, interesting idea that time is not just quantifiable, like in days, minutes, hours, whatever, but it's qualifiable. Like you can describe the quality of a time or the quality of people born at a certain time. So, in order to sort of integrate, I guess, what I'm learning about astrology, I started doing these astro weather forecasts. It's really common if you're a professional astrologer to write dailies, right? Daily horoscopes. So most of the time we see that in like newspapers or Cosmo as like, oh, this is your horoscope if you're like a Taurus sun or like a Libra sun or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So that's how most of us know astrology or like sun sign horoscopes. But even professional astrologers who don't do like sun sign horoscopes will do like dailies describing like, oh, this is kind of like the general theme for the day or something like that. So there were a couple key people I followed for a long time, like many years, who had been doing that. And I would like religiously every day, like as soon as I woke up, like check out their page. And then a lot of them kind of around the same time all stopped it, like dropped it. Either they got busy teaching or doing consultations or whatever. So I was like, well, I guess I have to do this for myself, right? So, so the astro weather forecasts are just kind of like an attempt to articulate the archetypes alive on that given day, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So when you do it, what comes to mind for you? Like, what do you chart out, or what do you look at, and then do you have an idea before you post about like how you're going to word it, or does it just kind of flow out of you like poetry?
That's a good point. I think it's more like the latter, more like a poetry. I will sometimes bounce back and forth between like texts I have that describe the planets or describe the signs, or like notes I've taken in classes, like about, like, let's say I'm going to, like today I described Mercury's ingress into Virgo. So before I wrote
Mm-hmm.
it, I like looked over what I had written down in a class all about the sign of Virgo. And then from there, I just kind of rolled with it. In general, like in my writing, I like to use a lot of alliteration, I find, like where multiple words all begin with like the same letter. Um, that's usually where it stems from. I have a planner. This is not a sponsorship, but there's a company called Honeycomb Collective, and they make these amazing astrological almanacs. So it's like all the data on when planets enter certain signs, when they make different aspects to other planets, and when they make aspects to like your own personal planets in your own personal chart, right? So I've used these for like 2 years now to track my own stuff, right? Like make
Mm-hmm.
notes like, oh, this is happening on this day, so expect this kind of thing to arise, right? um, so what I'll do if I do a forecast is they'll describe like on any given day sort of what's happening. So I'll look a couple days in advance usually to get like an idea going. And then when the day rolls around, either the night before or the morning of, I'll sit down. And in the beginning, I was trying to include like everything happening that day, and now I just tend to
Mm-hmm.
focus on the big stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because pretty much every day, the moon will, because she moves so fast, will make aspects to like 2 or 3 planets or something like that. Now I focus more on like, well, what's the more tangible or larger stuff, or like probably the more readily felt things, right? So yeah.
So what would you say to someone that um has shut away astrology, thinks it's like this woo mumbo jumbo, and it's hurting people. Like, what if it comes to that, where people really believe that it's like hurtful to people? And I think
Right.
individually we can use that knowledge to, in our minds, create all these worries and distractions, and
Oh, like like
you know,
astrological anxiety, like, oh my gosh, it's Mercury retrograde, and then being
yeah,
like anxious for 3 weeks straight.
yeah,
That's a really good question. Well, for starters, I think like a lot of people dismiss astrology as like new age claptrap, but the thing is like astrology is not new. It's really one of the oldest human institutions. So like no matter what culture you're from, you probably have some kind of lore, songs, stories bound up in the stars, bound up in the constellations. Like a lot of indigenous tribes, hunter gatherer tribes, a lot of their myths, stories, rituals will be bound up in when certain stars rise, when certain constellations are visible. Like, oh, when this constellation is visible, that means we move from our summer camp downstream because this type of fish, is in season or something like that, right? And there are records of people, recording, interpreting celestial phenomena as far as 27,000 BC, I think. There's like, yeah. So, and then, ancient monuments built with pictures of constellations, things like that, right? Astrology as we know it, though, in the West, is probably about 2,000 years old, maybe slightly older, but it itself is the combination of sort of three traditions that all kind of got melded into one around the time, right before, I guess, like 2000, like 0 BC or BCE, whenever we put that, time marker in, right, between BC and AD. So I guess in one way, saying that something's old doesn't necessarily justify its usage, right? But I think it at least dispels the idea of it being something fanciful and channeled by a guy in Arkansas in 1982 or something like that, right?
yeah.
Uh,
Oh god.
my main defense of it would be that you have to accept that it's not a literal description of reality, but a lyrical one or an archetypal one. Like it's a way of making story or making sense of the story of your own life. You know what I mean? Like it's a way of relating to like the archetypes, which is a word we've been bouncing around, I think, for a lot of this podcast so far. And the archetypes are, well, as coined by Carl Jung, an archetype is like a symbol in the human unconscious that structures reality. So these are certain figures that recur throughout myths and rituals. So like the king, the priest, the warrior, the this, the that, right? The lovers. And he says that these symbols are almost more alive than us, right? If you think about like a character in a story like Star Wars, take Luke Skywalker, for instance. You might say, oh, well, it's a story. Luke Skywalker's not real, right? Well, let me ask you this, Tony. How many people know who Luke Skywalker is, and how many people know who you are? Right? Like in a way, Luke Skywalker lives on in the minds of more people than you do, So these archetypes animate and give life to so much of our lives. We unconsciously enact them so often. In a way, you could say, like, I've stepped into like a certain archetypal role, right? As like a father or provider or something like that, right? But taken astrologically, all 7 of the classical planets could be said to represent an archetype, right? Um, Richard Tarnas, who wrote that book, Cosmos and Psyche, the way he got into astrology was he actually worked for a long time with Stanislav Grof. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he was like an early psychedelic researcher. He was like in that same stew, like Ram Dass and Timothy Leary, right? So in that
Okay.
same
Yeah.
era of like early psychological researchers who are trying like administering LSD to people in like clinical settings. Stan Groff came up in that same era, right? His assistant for a while and a collaborator was Richard Tarnas. And what Richard Tarnas found was he thought that people's trips, because they were looking for like correlations to like how people's trips would unfold. And he found that he thought or observed that people's trips unfolded in alignment with the like the astro weather, right? The space weather, the archetypes present that day or during that period of time. And that launched his own study of astrology. As for it
Interesting.
like being dangerous, I mean, insofar as they're insofar as like it provoking anxiety or like maybe someone putting too much stock in it, I think that's just up to somebody to like no matter what you believe, you probably shouldn't take it too seriously and you should probably question whatever you buy into. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And test it yourself before you put any stock in it, you know?
Yeah. I think that's a really good way of saying that. It's kind of like the whole like chicken before the egg, or um, like maybe that's a bad example, but
Well, I mean, an anxious person can fixate on anything. You could fixate on Mercury retrograde, or you could fixate on like, oh no, my knee hurts. Maybe I have this, terrible disease, and go down the rabbit hole of,
tendinitis,
yeah, right. Because I've done that,
diabetes.
that like the phantom illness anxiety, or there's different forms of anxiety. You know what I mean? Um, it doesn't have to be astrological.
I think that's a great answer. I think that's I'm really inspired by you and what I've learned from astrology, just from from what the way in which you've described the different aspects of like the terminology, and
Mm-hmm.
those terminologies have attached to them certain archetypes and ways in which they interact with celestial bodies, and the rhythms, the way that makes sense, it makes the most sense to me is that if you think of if you think of all matter as if you think of all life as energy, like
Mm-hmm.
everything that we're interacting with has energy, and you think about the gravitational pull that the earth has towards the sun, but also like pulling in the moon,
Right.
um and how the waves form based on based on the moon being
Right.
in orbit, um and the the way I like to look at it is like the earth has an electromagnetic field, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we as individuals have electromagnetic fields, and there are multiple energies that are coinciding or that are collaborating uh, at any given time. It is very similar to like everybody that we're interacting with, right? Very similar to everybody that we connect with
Oh, I
is
lost you, Tony.
a certain, and we lost Caleb, but he'll come back. He will come back. It's okay. It might be the thunderstorm that knocked out his power. I don't know. Um, but yeah, essentially what I was trying to say is like, I feel like And we're back.
And we're back. That was
uh,
swift. Nice.
yeah, yeah. Basically, what I was trying to say is like, I feel like each planet, each each planet has an electromagnetic field to it, right? And I
Mm,
feel like they they all impact each other. They all
hmm
like are related with each other's like vibration or energy, so to speak. And in the same way, I was just trying to explain. I'm kind of over explaining because I'm trying to
No problem.
go into it. Um, Everybody, people have electromagnetic fields, and when they're like in orbit, or they're like in their orbit, like, and they
Mm,
find in relation to each other, and it's also based on like if you've eaten that day, if you're I don't know, if you've slept that day, or you're having a good day, or you're um whatever. Like, I feel like the vibrations like either match, they either are and it's not totally binary, but it's like
it's like
attractive.
music. Either they can make
Yeah,
like a nice chord, right? And
yeah,
harmonize, or it might just
right,
sound dissonant, right?
right, exactly. And it's like magnets. I was talking about this with Rachel
Mm,
last night, actually. It's like magnets. And so like the way I like to describe astrology, or like the way I understand astrology
hmm
to a certain degree, is that every planet is like a magnet, and it
mm,
flips polarity every once in a while, based on where it's in alignment with other planets, and
right,
that energy has a direct correlation with the Earth, because it's in the same field.
right. I like
Um,
that you said like a magnet. In India, the planets were called graha or grahas, which means grabbers. Like they would pull you in, right? And so, like, I liked where you were going with relating to that, what you were saying about basically it being sort of a way of relating, right? Um, Different people have different flavors, or you could say different tastes, different songs, right? Or notes that they're playing, right? In the same way, studying astrology is relating or putting you in relation to the different planets, right? Do you have are you in harmony with this one? Are you not in harmony with that one? Right? You can look
mhm.
at different causes and conditions. Maybe your Venus, right, is very well placed, very well dignified, and in fact, you're an incredible artist, or you really enjoy aesthetics, decorating rooms, or you're very social, right? But let's say you have like a severely afflicted Mars, so you have bad energy levels, right? Your energy is always down, or maybe your energy's ratcheted way over the top, or you're not good at directing your energy in like a single pointed fashion. It's more diffuse, right? Um, so you can look at the way, like it's kind of cool with the idea of the birth chart. It's that you carry with like a snapshot of the particular moment you were born. You carry that snapshot with you for life, right? Um, So that moment where this planet was striking that note or resonating that frequency, right, stays with you, and in a way is like imparted to be your frequency or your note, right?
Notes. It all comes back to music.
Obviously.
And the universe is made of sound, and like if everything is vibration, right? It's all music. It's just
hmm
everything's wiggling.
Right. It's just a matter of figuring out, you know, what song they're singing.
And some people, for a long time, thought that we were the only wiggle in the whole universe. That was just one
It turns out
floating
there's a lot
ball
of
of
wiggles.
trees and water and
hmm
people and
hmm
animals.
Right.
But there was the sun, and then there was the moon. They seem like they're the same size,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, I think, one strange aspect is like there are all these historical um, like over time these certain ideas or concepts coalesce around each planet, like, oh, this planet's like this and this planet's like that, right? And then once we reach the Enlightenment era, we invent telescopes and have the ability to actually like peer at these planets and observe them, see them in greater detail than just as like blinking lights in the sky. Also, small sidebar, yes, it's called astrology, and astro means stars, but the ancients thought that the planets were also stars. Planet comes from the Greek word planeta, which means wanderer. So they called the planets the wandering stars. There were the fixed stars that stayed in place, but then there were the wandering stars that moved around and went where they wanted to, right? Um, so where was I before I went on that tangent?
If this was live, we could ask the audience.
I know, right? Wouldn't that be nice? Have a chat box and someone is just like, oh, you're saying this.
You were saying this.
Oh, so I was talking about the like how certain meanings coalesce over time, right?
Sure.
What's cool is like, for instance, with Saturn. Saturn is this like big bad planet. It's called the Greater Malefic, meaning like the biggest villain, right? In ancient Greek astrology. And he governs walls and limits and hard structures, and you know what I mean, like we encounter our limits with Saturn, where we must stop, right? And then we like put a telescope on Saturn and see it's bounded by these beautiful big rings, right? The planet is literally locked in place by like a fence of rings surrounding it. Jupiter is called the Greater Benefic and is taken to represent bounty, growth, getting big people, like big personalities. Well, we put a telescope on Jupiter and it turns out it's the biggest planet, right? It's fucking huge. And so on and so forth. Like, there's, I think, something synchronous about how people have these observations just through like having a relationship to the planets or observing them in other people's lives. And then I think there is something about like on the material level or like the scientifically observable level, some way where those things hold to be true or manifest in like a really literal way, right? Like Mars is god of bloodshed, and we get a look at that planet and it's bright red, things like that.
Yeah. It really spoke to me when I started understanding each planet and the quality of each planet, and then its relationship in my chart. That just blew my mind. That really just like took it to another level for me, because it's, a lot of people think of astrology as just like, oh, your sun sign, and that's it.
Yes.
A lot of people don't even know of it called your sun sign. They just think it's,
yeah, what's your sign?
What's your sign, or like your astrology or whatever it is.
Right.
And it totally shifted my perspective when I realized that it doesn't just all fall on your sun sign. It with every planet, and then outside of that, I know there's more that people tune into that like have even more fine-tuned forecasts / like determination of what's going on at this moment,
right,
or at a certain moment in the past, or a certain moment in the future, so to speak. But when I started paying attention to, so like my Mars is in Leo, right? And this past weekend we had a new moon in Leo. So really got me to like my anger and my passion, and like getting me to like to the forefront of like
Yeah, I got connected with that like visceral warrior energy, right?
Yeah. And so that it makes sense too with like my Mercury, which is about communication. My Mercury is in Taurus, so sometimes it takes a while for me to speak exactly what I'm trying to say,
right?
And it doesn't. It takes a second for me to get the truth of the point.
You're methodical about it, I'd say.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to hit on what you were saying about sun signs, what's interesting about that sort of misconception, right? That sort of the sun sign is your personality and your life direction and everything. What's crazy is if in ancient Hellenistic astrology, the sun wasn't even necessarily you in your chart. It could stand in for your father or figures of authority in your life. It could represent your highest ideals, that which you aspire to, that which inspires you. It's not necessarily you, but like a little plant growing up toward the sun, right? It's what you want to reach toward, right?
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Yeah, like the way, you take like a little plant and you put it in the shade and it's like, no, wait, it'll like purposefully twist itself out of the shade to get back in that sunlight. It's like taken from that perspective, the sun's like what you're always going after. Like, what is that big target you're chasing, or like, what do you want to grow toward? It's not just like, oh, how you act at parties or something like that,
Yeah. Speaking of which, what do you want to grow towards?
Ooh, that's a good question. What do I want to grow towards? So my sun sign is Virgo. I very much identify with that. Like I can deconstruct and tear apart the idea of sun sign astrology, but at the same time, I'm like, I really love being a Virgo, and I do some very Virgo-y things in Virgo-y ways. But when I like think of how that pertains to like the visions or like dreams of the future I'm chasing, I think of it in terms of like the classical vision of like some like usually a young woman, a maiden, right, a virgin, Virgo, a virgin holding like a chaff of wheat, right. The sign comes at harvest time, and I think of like visions of eventually living in like a permaculture homestead, reaping like harvests of my own skill, my like bringing to life like gardens where things can flourish. That's what I want to grow towards eventually, like being able to live in an earthship, like if you're familiar with that style of home building, like an earthship or something similar, being able to mostly grow my own food, being able to have some chickens, some goats, something like that, and live in like some off-grid situation, maybe not entirely off-grid, but like some degree of it, right? I still want to be able to, see my friends, maybe see a concert, see a show, right? But being able to harmonize, organize, be in contact, and be a caretaker of the natural world, something like along those lines. That's what I'd like to grow towards.
Beautiful.
What about you? That was a good question.
Yeah, I'm really looking at that right now, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to ask the question. Because we are part of a band, right? We have there is
the greatest damn band the universe has ever seen.
It's called Why Not, if people don't know. But so there's Why Not, and Why Not is a project of like kind of tying in these mystical, experiential things that I feel like have been helpful lessons in my life, and that um, lyrically we can build towards a better future. Um, like, so creating music through this band, right? And creating shows, creating experiences for people to gather together. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, that is something I like to do, and it is something that like brings me joy. Is probably like one of the highest excitements that I can think about when I think about like the beautiful experiences that I've had, is like bringing people together
Mm-hmm.
and being able to give them an experience that makes them feel empowered and loved and purposeful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there's that aspect of it. And then the other aspect that I'm thinking about it in that way is like, okay, so like, yes, that's all well and good, but how relevant is that in a collapsing world? You know, how relevant is that when, you know, certain aspects of our society start crumbling, or fascism rises, or all these
Right.
numerous things that can happen with this potentiality, this like, there's almost like a splitting of the timelines, and we get to choose which
Mm-hmm.
way we go. And it's going to be a collective choice. It's an individual choice, but like, you know, it's up to everybody how we really take this thing.
Right.
So I'm constantly thinking about that, and I'm constantly thinking about like, how can I align my life in a way that serves the best outcome of whatever choice humanity chooses.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I believe in the music front, that music is a way that gets to people's hearts, that gets through past the ego, where we can really like um, shift our way of thinking, almost like psychedelic experience for people.
Mm-hmm.
And in another sense, it is a way for people to gather together and make connections that never had connections before. Um, and I think about it in terms of future possibility of collapse, and those connections being important. Um, like, imp- it. I want to use a better word than connections. Like, important. Important relationships that can be the deciding factor, um, between somebody not having enough food to eat, and then having made this connection, and also believing in the serendipity of things and the synchronicity of things, and they just so happen to have grown a bunch of the food that they like the most or something, you know, like,
Right.
or they have the tool that they need to um put this last puzzle in its place.
Right.
Um, and so I think about that, and I think about how like, is that relying too much on the spiritual? Is that relying too
Mm-hmm.
much on like, I'm just playing the role of creating music that I feel like can help people's minds and bring people together for connections, for relational dexterity, like relational like resilience,
Right.
like uh so there's that. And then there's the other aspect of like, I do want to grow my own food, like I do want to live homestead, I do want to um learn about electricity, carpentry, psychology, group psychology. I want to teach classes. I want to, there's so many things I would like to do, and I'm just trying to hone in on what is the best use of my time.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of those things that like I love to connect with. Like this is one of the purposes I feel like is really aligned, is like talking to you,
Right.
and sharing that with the world, because I feel like we've had so many beautiful conversations over the past 4 years that we've known each other, or 3 years, whatever it's been. And that in itself can be a help to people,
Right.
Um
Well,
just
luckily in
shifting
community,
perspectives.
right, right. In community, you don't have to do all the things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I know you're struggling to parse out, well, what do I want to specialize in, or how do I best spend my time? But I think that level of relationality that you're talking about in terms of like truly leaning into interdependence, like I need someone for childcare, but that person needs someone to fix their plumbing, for instance, or you know what I mean, like returning to a level of direct barter, or like direct need. Like money is this intangible, or currency is this intangible stand-in, right? It's like it like holds energy, right? Like it's like for most people, like you earn money through trading your like hours, your blood, sweat, and tears, and then it gets congealed into this like artifact, right? And you can trade your blood, your sweat, and your tears as like a small token, or like an electronic signature for like somebody else's services. Well, you can just cut that out entirely. You can just be like, well, hey, I'm good at this, you're great at that. Like, how can we help each other out? So in that way, you don't have to do all the things, Tony.
Mm-hmm.
And that will be, I think, more important in the future anyway. Being able to navigate like that alone socially, being able to locate people you can trade with, establishing relationships with people like that. That's going to be, I think, more and more important in the future.
Yeah. I guess it's a really interesting thing, because it's like like my life is based on relationships. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's a really huge, probably the biggest part of what I'm here to do, is build healthy relationships as much as
Mm-hmm.
possible. And obviously I've failed in so many, well, not failed, but I have not been there. There's many times that I have not been at the best of my ability of communication and
Sure.
building healthy relationships. But I think overall, I have that's my purpose, is building enough relationships that are on the heart level, that
Mm-hmm.
um and then connecting those people with each other,
Mm-hmm. Right.
establishing this like love bond connection with you, and then this love bond connection with Marissa, or this love bond
Right.
connection with Rachel, or this love bond connection, like, and then have this like web that we all can kind of just utilize in a way that helps us to serve whatever need is needed.
Right. Right.
And outside it, like, in I guess I've struggled with that at times, because it's like, is that all I'm doing?
Mm-hmm.
And not that that's wrong or bad, or like
Sure.
that it's or that it's not enough. It's just, it makes me wonder, what is is that is that the main point,
Mm-hmm.
or is there something else that I'm supposed to be doing?
Well,
So,
as
and
you're
I'm not
saying that,
asking you.
oh no,
I'm
I know
just
it's
kind
a
of
little bit
like going
rhetorical.
through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
as you're saying that, like I know your chart or can picture it to some degree, like in my mind. So I'm thinking this got kicked off talking about the sun as that which inspires and you aspire to, right? Like sort of your guiding purpose or life directive, right? And you can parse out details about planets in terms of like where they fall, meaning like their particular house and their sign, right? So I know in your chart, your sun falls in your seventh house. That's the house that's directly across from the first, which is taken to be the house of the self, the body, the mind, right? The rising or the ascendant, right? Your sun is in the descendant house, right? The house of other. You were born basically then right as the sun was setting, right? As it's falling on the western horizon. So the seventh house is primarily governs like romantic relationships, one-on-one relationships. So it's interesting as you're talking about like making love bond connections in a one-on-one way with multiple different people, right? And then moreover, as a sign, the sun sign is Taurus, which is governed by Venus, who's the lady of like sensuality, but also like socializing itself, like how sweet it is to connect with others. Like it's very sweet to experience art, to experience good cooking and fine dining, but it really sucks to do that alone. Like what really makes good experiences or sensual experiences sweet is doing it with others, right? There's this like intimately like social sense with Taurus. Like think of cows and bulls, like they flock together. They love being together. You know what I mean? So thoughts popping in my head as you were sort of, peering into, what your sun sign, may say about you.
Yeah.
For me, it falls in my 12th though, which is like it's considered a very negative place or a fallen place. But I think for me, when I learned that, it like explained a lot of like my lifelong struggle with like depression and staring into the void and suicidal ideation. And like the 12th house is said to be the house of like sorrow, imprisonment, bad fortune, mental hospitals, things like that. But it also can be like hidden things. And I've spent the better part of my life like staring down like esoterica and learning as much as I can, being like a Virgoan librarian, organizing and accruing data about the occult, right? The hidden things.
Yes.
So in part, that's kind of what I aspire to, but because it's my 12th house, I'm not very public about it. I'm not very public about how much I love magic and sorcery and all that, but,
well, it's public now.
It's super public now. It's on a podcast. That's so when you're asking like what am I growing toward, one thing I'm growing toward is I want to be a professional astrologer, but I'm just getting that going now. Like I'm a podcast guest, so I should be able to be like, well, at the end of this cast you can check out my website and book a consultation. But I'm just starting to I feel pretty competent with the material now, but it's a matter of like setting up all like the unsexy parts of it, like establishing a brand on social media, and like putting together a website and all that. Ideally, that's what I would like to do professionally, because I feel as if I would be able to pursue a passion, be helpful to other people, but also it would free up a little bit more time that I can spend with my daughter, right? So in a way, that's what I'm growing toward, wanting to be, I guess, like a part-time professional woo person, having been definitely skeptical and critical of professional woo people for a long time. But here I am,
Here you are. Here we are.
Here we both are. Yeah. What a moment.
Yeah.
Man, I'm so excited for you to come back. I know you're having a good time, but like I'm selfishly really excited to see you again.
Yeah. No, it's time. It really is. I've had good experiences here. I've had some shitty experiences here. And really all of it has like just pushed me and in all the
Mm-hmm.
ways that I can be pushed really has just like extended me to like um my deepest sorrow. My like I
Yeah.
like for the first week that I was here in Dominica, I um I was cut off from tobacco. I didn't have a way of smoking any weed. I didn't have any way
Mm-hmm.
of seeing anybody. I was in quarantine. I couldn't go
That's a 12th house
outside of the
experience.
house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Locked away,
And
staring at your own psyche.
I was, the people that are housing me, they would bring me food on a plate and just like set it down and then like maybe say a few words and then go off. And then I'm like, all right, and, like eat my food. And then I'm like, just like sitting in my room, like, I read a book? Do I
Right.
meditate? And like, oh yeah, I did all this. I feel accomplished. And it's like, I'm still in this house. What do
Yeah,
I
man. I mean,
do?
what's like the most severe punishment in prison? Solitary confinement, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and I don't want to say it was like that, but there
Sure, but
was
I'm saying like either way, there's something very severe and difficult about not being able to relate to anybody or anything, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Even though I could call people,
Mm-hmm.
and I did. Um, I forget where this was going. Um,
You're
there was a
talking
point.
about travel, you coming home, shitty
Oh
experiences,
yeah,
being a part of
yeah, yeah,
travel.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I'm excited to come home. I'm excited to
Mm-hmm.
see you, and I'm excited to cook food together and
Right.
um to uh, see Kaori and
Mm-hmm.
be in town and
Yeah.
be able to go to events and throw events and
Right.
yeah,
And we're excited for that
all the good
too, you know?
things.
Isn't it
Yeah.
interesting though how like I think for me personally, I can relate to that coming home moment and how like before you set off on the journey or like before I set off of some of my journeys, one thing spurning me to do so in the first place is sort of like this like grass is greener on the other side kind of thinking, right? Like, well, if I
Yeah.
just travel over there, things will get a lot better. And then you go to go to some other place, and you're like, well, this sucks, that sucks, this is terrible, I hate this. You know what I mean? They're like, no matter where you
Yeah.
go, you're going to encounter like difficulties or things are going to be less than desirable. You know,
Yeah.
um, so it's interesting how actually like I think a lot of what we encounter as being like the shitty, as we've said, or like terrible, difficult, strenuous parts of travel actually end up being a lot of like the meat of it, you know, or at least what I ended up taking home from my own journeys was, you know, encountering those tough aspects, you know, and having to really wrangle with them.
All
And what's
right,
like
man.
what's so to bring it full circle, we kind of
Okay.
talked
Okay.
about like
Okay.
the hero's
Sorry.
journey at the beginning, right? And
Yeah.
psychedelic trips and all that. So at the end of the
Yeah.
journey, as Joseph Campbell says, like the hero always returns with the boon. You know, I think he calls it the elixir of life, or like something to revivify the old world. You know, he comes back home again and he is changed, but he also brings like an artifact or a way to change his world. So like, what are you bringing home with you? You know, what's your like super dope
Mm.
souvenir, you know, or your lesson learned?
I think it is a mindset. I want to speak to it in a way that will honor it and um, make it make sense.
Mm-hmm.
There's a project I'm working on right now called Paradigm for the Next Generation, and it is a set of code of conduct. It is a code of conduct connected to instinctual psychology that is connected to a way to deal with the coming crises that we are currently embarking on.
Right.
And so a lot of that that philosophy in this project has just like it's made me really think about like how I live my life in relation to like my rhythms and patterns and like my psychology and like what does resilience mean to me, you know,
Right.
like with this project it's all about local resilience, right? And like just like grass has always been about like local resilience, the application of that, I don't know if we've succeeded in the way that I would like to yet, but I think what it all comes down to is what the medicine that I feel like I am bringing is a closer relationship with my own local resilience.
Right.
And that in itself, like the habits that I
Local
choose to
meaning
cultivate.
located within yourself.
Yeah. So
Right.
like the habits that I'm forming for myself and the awareness of who I am and what I'm here to do, and having that mind map, so to speak, be defined and clear. I think when I come back, I'm bringing a sense of confidence in myself that I've never had before, and that is
Right.
going to allow me to show up more authentic to who I truly am, that will allow better exchange of ideas, more free flow of exchange of energy, and building relationships the way that are in the most highest authentic way that they can be, and to serve the local resilience of the actual place that I'm going to be in, not just the local resilience here.
Right.
So yeah,
Well
I
said.
a roundabout way of saying that I feel like I have a better connection with myself, that I'm going to be bringing to all the relationships that I already have and the relationships that I will be cultivating.
Nice. Well said. I don't know if you could hear it or the audience can hear it, but at the moment you said who I truly am, I could audibly hear like a lightning strike and thunder roll where I'm at right now. So that was pretty cool. I kind of got chills.
Blessed be.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today, Tony, for inviting me on, man.
Thank you for your time. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
amazing. I'm really grateful to spend another evening talking with you and connecting with you. And I look forward to when I return and we can have more conversations. And with a lot of the people that I've had on, I'd like to do round 2
Ooh,
with them.
nice.
You're definitely one of those people that I would love to do another podcast with.
I'm still looking forward to the Hunter round 2.
Yeah. No, yeah, that needs to happen.
That's
for
going to be
sure.
unreal.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to come back and speak again. That'd be fantastic.
Awesome. Well, everybody who's listening, I'm really grateful that you tuned in. And we found Caleb Mccoy, who's an amazing person. I'm sure you know by now. And just entirely grateful and humbled to do this podcast. And Caleb, we love you. I love you. The world sees you now. in a way that has never been seen before.
And can never be unseen.
Bear, brother.
Thank you, Tony. Sarvamangalam.
Farewell to everybody. Bye-bye.